Welcome everyone to another episode of Quantum Conversations, empowering communities and elevating leadership. If you caught our last episode, you know we've been unpacking some of the core themes of a practical guide, 21 good practices for stronger, more effective owners corporations. A sharp, insightful piece of work written by today's guest, Nicholas Abbey. Nick is a highly regarded leader and practitioner in the strata and community sectors, and someone who has spent a great deal of time thinking about what makes communities truly effective technically, culturally, and relationally. In our first conversation, we explored the areas of direction and governance and had a very in-depth conversation around those key areas, and you can catch that episode on our website. And so today we're going into the next two components of the guide. We're turning our attention to engagement, which incorporates participation, inclusion, transparency, trust, and connection. And lastly, capacity, covering technology, memory, handover innovation, and governance infrastructure. These areas that often get overlooked, but they're absolutely critical, is because if people don't feel included, if expectations aren't clear, or if the right skills aren't around the table, everything starts to fall over. So whether you're a committee member navigating conflict or someone working to lift engagement and shared responsibility, I think you'll find this conversation both practical and insightful. So as we work through, Nick will be drawing on the practical guide and the framework behind the 21 good practices we'll explore together. So Nick, thank you for your time again for this next session.
Thank you, Michael.
So we work through the last two key components of what's a really in-depth, fascinating and valuable tool for owners looking to get on committees or those already sitting on their owners corporation committee. And we'll have a link to the detailed full guide from our website, and we'll just touch on the key areas today of those last two components. And the first one is engagement. And why are these people-centred areas just as important as direction and governance, which was our first two key areas, Nick?
Well, I think there's a broader issue there that owners corporations are about property, about common property, but they're also about people. And the two obviously are just as important as each other. And we've always wanted to work in the people space as to how we govern well, how we achieve things together, at the same time, not neglecting our core business focus on common property. But a smart OC has always had a two-pronged approach. It's concerned about property, and it's concerned about people, and it's concerned about community wellbeing, and those things obviously matter.
Yes. The next practice 14 is invite resident input before committee meetings and report back promptly. So in the guide, you highlight the importance of inviting resident input before committee meetings and reporting back afterwards. What led you to emphasise this, and how do you think it can impact the relationship between committees and residents, especially in large communities?
We always say that trust doesn't grow from decisions alone. It grows from inclusion, transparency, and two-way communication. And when residents obviously feel heard and see how their input shapes OC decisions, confidence grows, and so does participation. And sometimes committees can be their own worst enemies, and sometimes it's just an objective reality where there are not enough people putting up their hand to be involved or participate in their community, and there may be very good reasons for that, and people can be time poor and be a whole lot of reasons why residents aren't involved. But sometimes there are issues, and when I say that committees can be their own worst enemies, if we're too inwardly focused and we're not sharing enough information about our own work, well, we may be creating unnecessary obstacles for greater engagement. So we'd love to see a virtuous cycle of engagement where the committee, the manager and lot owners, and we call that the strategic triad. You know, there's an engagement triangle there where all three should be linking to each other in some particular way. And a good manager, of course, is very skillful in ensuring that lot owners and the committee are linked well and that they're communicating with each other. So all of that builds stronger relationships and improves decision making and ultimately leads to more effective community-focused outcomes. So how do we make this practical? How do we make this doable? It's a simple cycle. We always want to see that a committee or the manager in the first place is inviting agenda items in advance. So just sending out an email to lot owners, calling for ideas or suggestions at least 1 week before each meeting, including a brief reminder of the OC's goals and key focus areas. So, you're not dealing with something abstractly, but people feel that, right, these are the kinds of issues that we can be discussing or which matter to us, and we may well have a view about that. And then, of course, to include that in the meeting materials, table suggestions for discussion, or it might be delegated to a subcommittee or a working group if it's a significant issue that needs some further thought by a smaller group of people. And then, of course, to close the cycle, report back promptly. Minutes ought to be, and there's no excuse now with AI, obviously, minutes can be done quickly and they should be circulated. And I love your idea, Michael, where, there's a video conversation where the chairperson and the manager discuss, what was in the minutes, what was decided, and that may then be circulated as promptly as possible. So that, whether it's through emails or notice boards or online forums, or if there's an OC newsletter, we're creating that recurring, that feedback loop, ensuring that everyone is in the know and they have opportunities to contribute to at least putting forward a suggested item on the meeting agenda. And sometimes residents may also want to be present for that discussion as well. Yeah. So it's opening it up. And I've used the word before, and I'm not trying to be rude about this, but sometimes committees can have the appearance of being a secret society rather than where they're open, they're accessible, and most importantly, they're tapping into the most important expertise of all, the members of their community.
It makes me think around, we've got 5 key areas of our management model. There's the business administration, there's the asset and governance, and there's the governance and compliance. They're the 3 categories. Every manager's doing those. But the next one is communication. In isolation, it's a critical component. And there's a lot of tools around that we're proactive on. And the 5th one is community. Again, it's pretty unique. Obviously, we specialise in master plan communities, so communication is critical. And community is also a massive driver in these large estates. So that's another area that you focus on is community projects. And indeed, practice 15, support community projects and participation events. What do you see the biggest hurdles for getting residents actively involved, and why is this so important?
Well, this is not the time and the place to philosophise about it, but there has been a drift for decades, and some talk about the demise of social capital, whether people join organisations once people were members of all kinds of professional bodies or service clubs and so on, and they still are. People volunteer their time and often generously. But many organisations have noticed that over the last 40 or 50 years, maybe longer, there's been a drift away from being involved in collectivities, in organisations of all kinds. And then along come owners' corporations. And it provides new insights into how people do volunteer their time, and they may not be members of traditional organisations that once had large memberships, but owners' corporations, there are often high levels of involvement and activity, but sometimes there aren't. And that just might be because a community goes through its own cycle. In the owners' corporation that I'm particularly familiar with, when all the homes were being built and so on, there was a lot of interest, obviously, in what was happening, and people would attend AGMs because they wanted to find out what the next phase might be or any issues that might be affecting them directly. But over the course of many years, there can be a drop-off in attendance at AGMs. It may be a struggle to have the same numbers of members of committees and so on. So we're always looking for better ways to engage people, and we've talked about community surveys. And if they're done well, the most recent community survey I saw, it had a large number of lot owners responding, and was done professionally. The questions were accurate and obviously had struck a chord with lot owners. So, that's a skill set in its own right. How do you create a survey that's likely to engage community members and mobilise their opinions so that we're really hearing their voice and what what the issues might matter to them and what their suggestions are. And of course, that all has to be scaled as to whether it's a small OC or a large OC and so on. For a small OC, it just might be a matter of knocking on doors, and saying, well, what are your opinions about this particular issue, or what's a better way forward? We also like to see community projects, and some OCs have in the case of, some of the OCs that I've worked with, they have a long history of even having a budget put aside for funding community projects. There doesn't need to necessarily be a formal community engagement strategy. Sometimes that's useful in a large OC, like this is our strategy, so we want to work it out as to what are the practical processes and steps to build engagement. But some of the obvious things include around sustainability, things that I've seen, tree planting, gardening days, solar insulation, bulk buys, residents taking the lead on these, celebrating place and story. An owners corporation that I'm associated with, it even secured funding for a history project. Who knew that there was funding available, government funding available for history projects? So we were able to write up a group was formed and was able to document the history of our area. It's not necessarily core business, but the owners corporation was at least facilitating that opportunity without it being a common property issue per se, even though there was actually history about our own particular community and owners corporation as part of the project. Cultural sharing activities, storytelling, food traditions. Look, there are just so many things that people do, and some are sustainable, some work over time, and others are once off, and that's great. In communities with lots of families, there can be kid-friendly initiatives, simple social gatherings, morning teas, meetups, dog-friendly events, casual barbecues, Christmas events, Easter events, etc. And then, of course, in terms of cultural inclusion, what's appropriate for a particular community with all of that. Communication and engagement. How many OCs have benefited from just having their own Facebook page? And it may actually have a high security setting so no one can access it. But that's really important. Look, it's always a matter of starting small, what's realistic, partnering also with other organisations or local council, supporting residents to lead. Residents are often more than happy to, whether it's organising a barbecue or whatever, but just having some momentum around community participation so that we see two things. There's community engagement so that we're actually hearing the voices of lot owners as to the decisions that are being made through the owners corporation, but there's also participation. What are the levels of participation in the community? And are there objective factors that make it difficult to have a higher level of participation, or are we creating some obstacles ourselves? And, when a committee and a manager discuss that, sometimes we realise that we are perhaps creating some obstacles that are undermining the opportunities for a higher level of engagement and participation.
A big thing for us as well is, there's data from government around, there's a real loneliness epidemic out there, do you know what I mean? And these community projects can bring residents together with similar interests into the common property space, and they can get to know their neighbours, and you're helping address and, lessen the likelihood that loneliness is going to impact, residents in your community. So for us, that's a big driver of our events and activating the common property, creating different activities that bring residents with different interests together so they can mix and get to know other residents and build that community within this.
That message resonates with me, absolutely. And depending on the demographics of a particular community and the extent to which, a community organically is just generating its own groups and neighbourhood associations and so on, it may do that anyway. But absolutely, when people do things together, whether it's just walking, chatting, planting, gardening, they develop together, and they develop their own sense of community. It's not something that's artificially imposed. It's quite organic. And so, when you build more than gardens, you build goodwill, you build long-term co-ownership, and a connected OC thrives. And the more connections, the more opportunities that are exposed for the committee, that you become aware, didn't know that person was involved in that. And therefore, they may have suggestions for how the OC can really benefit from another idea or suggestion, simply because we've now heard that person through a level of community involvement.
Yeah. And as we're looking at ways to engage with residents more effectively, the next practice 16 talks about creating an information and participation guide and make contact details accessible. So how can this guide be tailored to suit large owners corporations, and why is it so valuable for owners?
So residents obviously can't engage or participate if they don't know who does what, how decisions are made, or how to contribute. And transparency builds trust, visibility reduces confusion. So to have access to the right information makes everything run more smoothly, obviously. So an OC information and participation guide, it could be called something else. It might just be a few pages, or it might be, a 12-page document. It demystifies the process. It encourages constructive involvement, and it creates a more informed community. And it's not just about policies. It's about people knowing how to participate in their community and make a difference. So what do you include in a guide? Obviously, committee members, names, role, it's optional. As a chairperson, I'm always happy to have my mobile number and email provided. But in the first place, of course, the first port of call is the manager. But often, sometimes people want to actually talk to a committee member. Some other committee members are happy to have their contact details, but that's not mandatory. Obviously, that's quite optional. Any working groups, what the committee and manager do, the rules, obviously, how to raise issues or provide input, contact points for maintenance, complaints, agenda items. If there's a conflict, well, before it becomes a grievance procedure, maybe you can, if you're aware that you can actually contact the manager who might be able to sort it out for you, in a way which is likely to reduce conflict rather than contribute to it. And how and when residents can contribute to meetings, projects. Then, of course, there are policies, meeting schedules, the rules overview, where to find key documents like, your action plan or strategic plan or your budget and the rules. And then key dates and engagement windows. Like when's the AGM coming up? When will there be a budget consultation? So you're just making it accessible and visible to all. And of course, it should be emailed to all lot owners at the start of the year. So that's what we call an information and participation guide. It might be less grandiose than that. It might just be it might be some dot points in an email.
Yeah.
But, it's the right of every resident to know who's who in the zoo and how do you progress any issues that you might have. And what other things do you need to know about your owners corporation, particularly how in some OCs, there can be quite a churn. There's a turnover of lot owners, and what was known by all at the beginning may not be known by newer residents. And of course, we often don't factor in renters. That sometimes we focus narrowly on lot owners, but those who are renting, well, they don't have the same role, obviously, as a lot owner. But they
Still
can make
part of the community.
Absolutely, they're part of the community. They make a contribution to the community, and even community surveys. Well, OCs have to think about that. Do you exclude renters or do you include them? Well, probably you err on the side of inclusion, because that's what builds a community. And the more ideas that are contributing, the better that community will be for all, including lot owners.
So you touched on conflict, and unfortunately sometimes it does arise, and that's the next practice 17. Resolve conflict constructively, use early dialogue and mediation where needed. So how can OCs implement this strategy to prevent issues from becoming bigger problems down the line?
So we should be very proud of owners corporations, because it's amazing how, what's an owners corporation? Common property, private property, and people working together to solve problems, resolve conflicts, work collaboratively. It's a testament to how well OCs do function that we don't have more conflicts within owners corporations. There's a lot of common sense that actually dictates how people work together. But when you bring diverse people together, if you bring people together who are all the same, there's likely to be conflicts. Ideally, they're nipped in the bud. When handled constructively, disagreement can lead to better decisions. There's nothing wrong with disagreement. Like the best decisions I've often been associated with, you've actually had often quite contrasting views, and they've actually informed a better resolution or a better motion or a better decision, for the owners corporation. What matters is how conflict is addressed. and a formal grievance process. And if it's done well, a grievance process can also be, a great way of bringing people together and resolving a matter, and everyone goes home, feeling that the matter has been resolved and that's in the best interest of all. But sometimes the positions are so entrenched, or the relationships are strained, or the options are already limited, that we always try to nip issues in the bud. And the best way to do that is through mutual assistance. And I've seen managers work miracles sometimes, where they brought together neighbours who, it might be an argument over a fence or something that's being built in the backyard, or, in terms of apartments or townhouses. And there's an issue there where the manager is aware of the problem and proactively has been able to reach out and resolve the matter. But that's a skill set too, of course, and we don't necessarily expect every manager because, this is overloading the role of managers too, because managers end up being all things to all people, and we have to be mindful of that. But nonetheless, I've seen some managers really, and I'm not using hyperbole here, they've worked miracles. They've been able to bring together people and resolve a matter, or they've actually reached out to find, some external mediation service. So some of the practical things, how we prevent escalation through early conversations. I've mentioned surveys. Sometimes surveys, and there's always should be an anonymous component in a survey, it's clear that some residents are unhappy about what other residents are doing, and that might be a noise matter. Well, that then may alert the manager and the committee that what can we do proactively in this space so it doesn't become a grievance process or just goes pear-shaped and disrupts the unity within our community. So even tools like that can be quite informative. And then in terms of committees, meeting protocols to keep discussions on track. Committees can struggle with their own internal conflicts. Involve the manager, as I said, as a neutral facilitator where appropriate, and often that's really powerful. Have a conversation about power and power imbalances too. Sometimes we like to be very technical and neutral about this, but not everyone feels confident speaking up. There may not be fair processes for all parties to be heard. Some people might feel that some parties to a dispute have more power or influence. Well, there might be committee members. So, there needs to be a conversation about power and how that might be affecting it. Look, some OCs have also been smart in appointing a community liaison person, maybe a neutral, respected person, a person who's been in the community for a long time, and that might be the go-to point for, residents who have a concern or a complaint. So anything that can be done to prevent it from becoming a grievance process, there are a lot of steps along the way. And then, of course, even community events, just bringing people together. Sometimes, assumptions about each other are addressed when we're actually
having a conversation.
Having a conversation around the barbecue, that's right. And the presence of the manager and committee members can also be useful in that regard. The big idea here, conflict is natural, mismanagement is optional. That's the key issue here.
Yes. We've spoken previously around, from an engagement perspective, connecting with local council and the partnerships, what value that can provide. And that's the next practice 18, build strategic OC local council partnerships. In the guide, you highlight the potential of AI tools like ChatGPT to streamline governance tasks, such as drafting motions and minutes. What prompted you to include this, and what role do you see these partnerships play in shared issues like safety and sustainability?
Well, as you know, Michael, we've had a long history of engagement with local government. And then I've also done presentations, in forums involving, staff from local government and owners corporations and committees and so on. It's a fascinating area. And it's an area because some people, and look, people are always concerned about our country being overgoverned, so I get that. But some people have actually suggested that owners corporations are like the fourth tier. Yeah, the fourth tier of government, and people think, oh, I'm horrified. So we've got another tier of government. But there's a natural relationship, therefore, between local government and owners corporations. And with 1 in 4 Victorians, and there is similar stats in other states, though in other states it's much smaller, of course, but 1 in 4 Victorians being members of or affected by an owners corporation. And when I've discussed this with members of government and ministers about other issues altogether, and at first their eyes would glaze over, when I'm having a conversation about what were called body corporates and now owners corporations. But when they would hear that 1 in 4 Victorians are members of or affected by an owners corporation, this is a significant force to be reckoned with.
Okay.
And ideally, owners corporations are self-governing communities. Once they have a strat plan and once they govern well, and once people are collaborating, they know how to resolve conflict, and you've got good leadership and you've got a great manager who's supporting all of that, all kinds of things can happen. So local councils have influence, they have funding, they have expertise, they have networks that owners corporations can overlook. Yet many of our goals like safety, sustainability, livability, community, amenity, they overlap directly with council responsibilities, or practical things like traffic management and road safety. So building a working relationship with council obviously helps your OC to punch above its weight, and to become a valued local community partner, not simply a ratepayer. So what can be done? Well, identifying shared issues, and I've mentioned some: traffic and road safety, energy efficiency, sustainability, flood, fire, emergency readiness. Many owners corporations have done fabulous work in that regard. Open space access, improving your neighbourhood, in other words. When we've seen it work well, it's good to have a council liaison person. Now, for a small OC, that might just be knowing the local councillor. For a larger OC, that might be someone at director level who becomes your, liaison person. There are opportunities for committee members or the chairperson to be part of perhaps some planning groups, or, if it has a bearing on your owners corporation and future developments, to align owners corporation planning with council timelines. So, if you do have some goals, well, how do they sync with the council's budget and planning cycle? So be ready to engage when there are grant or partnership opportunities available. And there's an example here that we'd like to, I should actually mention, but what were the main lessons when we were working with local government? And that led to some really significant outcomes for that particular owners corporation. Strategic planning was the foundation. Once we had a strategic plan that outlined clear community goals, that was the basis, obviously, for productive engagement with council. We were a strategic partner now. We're not as big as local government, we don't have the same budget, but, as a reasonably sized owners corporation, we had a plan, and a plan with goals which could add value to local government work and vice versa. The chairperson and the manager, their co-lead roles, like some of the committee members, some of the lot owners, they played really significant lead roles. They drove this process. But it's also important for the manager and the chairperson to be, doing work between meetings. Are they reaching out to, local councillor or key staff around things? And one time we actually allocated part of the annual budget to fund the manager's work in external engagement, because it was so important. It was leading to tangible outcomes for our community. So for the small amount of extra funding for the manager, we were getting much more investment from council as a consequence. Some of the issues tackled were traffic management and car parking, energy efficiency, solar options, fire readiness and flood mitigation, conservation, open space planning, a local history project. That's a big list. And this didn't all happen in 1 year, but over a number of years, these were the opportunities that were progressed. I emphasise resident-led community participation. Residents can often bring council officers and neighbours together for activities like, a solar bulk info session or a community planting day. The high-level council for a big OC is really important, the high-level council engagement at director level, so that you actually have your own whole of council agenda. There's nothing worse than ending up in a silo or a particular part of council. And when it's worked well, again, this is for a large OC. For a smaller OC, it's your local councillor and how that person can assist you. But for a larger OC, we actually found that once we had a contact at director level, they became our whole of council czar. They were there to make sure that any, problem or complaint or issue raised by a resident, it would be sent efficiently to the right part of council to be addressed, as well as dealing with higher level matters, in the best interests of all the parties. And finally, of course, funding and planning support. Once you're in the loop, well, you can secure funds for works around your goals or around goals where there's a mutual interest. So I suppose the big idea here, don't just manage your common property, help shape your neighbourhood. That's what matters, and Look, it doesn't mean that the partnership solves all problems, but it may well unlock some shared value. And it also means we shift away as a community, because I've had complaints about local council, whether the rubbish has been collected on time or whatever. But once you move from complaints into proactive engagement with council, you do shift the conversation and the planning, the opportunities elsewhere. And that's a really productive engagement with, between an OC and a council. But for a smaller OC, it just might be, flagging issues around safety or trees or parking, with your local councillor. Either way, large or small, it's a matter of engaging with council.
And the final one, engagement, is practice 19, join or build local or statewide OC networks for shared learning. So what value do you see in shared learning networks, and how can they be developed in your experience?
We've discussed previously, of course, Michael, that when I joined an owners corporation committee, I learnt from committee members with extensive past experience, and I learnt from the manager likewise. So in a sense, there was informal mentoring, that they were able to not formally mentor or coach, but they could point you in the right direction or give you the benefit of their wisdom, their practical wisdom from their experience. You hope that's the case. And in my case, I benefited from that. It supported me in my own growth as a committee member and ultimately as a chairperson in how you work within an owners corporation. But the reality is most owners corporations, and particularly smaller OCs, they're left to their own devices, and they hope they have a manager who can assist them, and that often happens. But if you're operating in isolation, there's the problem of reinventing the wheel, repeating mistakes, relying solely on past committee members or the manager for advice. Without shared learning, owners corporations may be vulnerable to poor decisions, or just missed opportunities. And in other sectors like education, healthcare, collaboration and peer learning, they're standard. So why not for owners corporations? So many of us have talked about this for some time as to how there need to be networks, and many owners corporations have created fabulous local and regional networks. And I think, of course, some of the OCs, they've got, there are 4 or 5, 10 OCs in a particular area, like at South Bank, and, they learn from each other, they support each other. But at another level, there's peer-to-peer OC mentoring, meeting up, sharing information about trusted contractors, sharing information about good managers. So, it cuts both ways. But managers often are happy to support these networks because they know that it's not like the mushroom farm, where you feed something to OCs and, you sort of keep them in the dark. Managers realise that when owners corporation committees and lot owners are informed, knowledge is power, but that's power that can also drive a partnership.
It's going to be a more effective run owners corporation if they're educated and understand what their role is and are learning from others. There's no doubt about that.
Which also means, absolutely, Michael, sometimes, an OC might ask their manager, look, are there other OCs open to connecting? We want to learn from them. It's not to gossip about the manager. It's to actually learn from each other so we improve our work. And, smart managers do that, obviously. But also like statewide networks, and there are organisations in other states, of course, and there's an organisation emerging here in Victoria as well. Local connections are valuable, but some issues are broader. So building a statewide OC network, that can influence policy, share emerging practices on topics like sustainability, insurance, fire risk, resident engagement, share tools, templates. If you've got a good strat plan, share it. I always have. Whatever strategic plan we've created, I share it with other OCs, to inform their practice, and in turn, they might do something better than that we've done. So that's another issue as well, and that's not an immediate thing. But we say here, local connections solve local problems. Statewide networks of OCs shape the future of the sector. So that's something to work towards.
Yes. So if engagement's about building connection, then capacity is about having the tools and culture to follow through. So let's shift to that now, the last area within the guide, which is capacity. And practice 20 is use AI like ChatGPT to draft reports, minutes, motions, and support smart benchmarks. What's led you to AI in this context, and how have you seen these tools impact decision-making in owners' corporations?
Well, early days, obviously. But we're seeing management firms and we're seeing committees and individuals use these tools, and I'm excited. You know, and I've been part of all of these things, including ChatGPT and so on from the very beginning, and it's transformed the way I work. Well, that's my personal story. And look, there's another side to it. It's not all positive. Everything's double-edged with technology, obviously, as to what it does and the impact on, for that matter, the strata management sector. You know, there may be deleterious consequences as much as positive outcomes. But AI tools like ChatGPT, when committee members are time poor, not everyone is confident drafting formal documents or clear resolutions. You know, those tools can save time, reduce confusion, support more consistent, well-structured governance documents. I've seen, you know, drafting or refining motions, or ever since COVID, we just had more circular resolutions. You know, there are more decisions being made through email than ever before. That has grown at an exponential rate. And sometimes the quality and the legitimacy and robustness of those circular resolutions may be questionable. You know, that needs to be looked at. So how do we use tools when, you know, decisions are made quickly, we're no longer meeting face-to-face as often as we do, or we still do, but we're making more decisions between meetings through circular resolutions. Structuring minutes and action lists, you know, turning notes into clear, logical, insightful records. How we check the tone in notices, AGM invitations, resident updates. Are we really engaging and invitational, you know? Or is there still a sort of a legacy of bureaucracy, you know? Yeah. We're not really engaging people. Like, I still see AGM documents and I look at them and I think, I could have done this in the 1950s. So what's changed? The 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, let alone the 21st century, nothing has really changed, you know? And that shouldn't be the case. And that's no reflection on the people creating those things. We can just be locked into patterns and we just don't know how to extricate ourselves from those patterns, or we're just so busy, you know, with managers having to manage so many firms that they find it a struggle to, you know, spend time on crafting documents. Now with AI, things like ChatGPT, I'm seeing, you know, a vast improvement in how documents like strategic plans are being developed. So look, you know, we use AI as a thinking partner. It's not a replacement for decisions or obligations. It doesn't make decisions for us, but it can certainly help us to communicate them clearly, consistently, and efficiently. So we always say, let AI do the admin so the committee and manager can focus more on leadership and governance. That's the opportunity here. And just making sure that there are quality documents circulating, which are not only words, but also the images that increasingly that are generated through AI, so that we are doing a refresh and all of our documents that are quite customary and we take for granted and sometimes haven't been reviewed over decades as to whether they're still serving to engage lot owners.
Yes, that's great. The last item is practice 21, build, preserve, renew and use your OC's corporate memory. So why does this matter and how can OCs begin to build a living knowledge base, if you like, that evolves over time?
This is the last one, and yet in some ways and there's no hierarchy, of course, of these 21 practices. So, you know, we acknowledge that. But this is just such an important area and it touches upon so many key issues. Committees change, obviously. Managers move on. And OC's decisions, insights, it's hard-won lessons. And this can be over many years, in some cases over many decades. They shouldn't disappear with people who have served as a manager or as a committee member or a lot owner who was leading a particular initiative. So strong corporate memory obviously helps an OC grow wiser over time, avoiding repeated conversations, recurring mistakes, and missed opportunities. We suggest here that the loss of corporate memory is one of the most underestimated risks in an owner's corporation. A community's memory, it often lives in email inboxes, informal conversations in people's heads. When it walks out the door, the OC loses that hard-won knowledge and the community may pay the price in, and I list these, setbacks, confusion, avoidable effort, inefficiency and missed opportunities. Now, I don't want to dramatise that. because, you know, we're all adaptable and flexible, and an OC is very skillful at finding new ways of doing things, being innovative. But there's something else playing out here as well. Preserving and using corporate memory isn't about nostalgia, it's about effective governance, but it's also about getting the balance right. We still see OC committees where there can be two extremes. Many people have been members of the committee for a long, long time, or sometimes at the AGM, they haven't been elected and there's a new group. And sometimes that can be healthy. Sometimes it reflects perhaps a certain polarisation in the community, which may not be in fact healthy at all. And particularly as a committee member, then performing your fiduciary duty. How do you straddle those divides if that's been the case at an AGM? But the big point here is that a strong committee blends experience and renewal. Too many long-serving members can limit innovation and entrench habits. Too many newcomers without historical knowledge may lead to repeated mistakes or slowed momentum and unnecessary missteps. And we always say, you know, reinventing the wheel or stalling before it turns, you know, especially in a large OC, but even a small OC, if you lose any of that corporate memory, that may be a struggle, you know, and that may be a significant setback, sometimes by months, sometimes by a year or more, as to, are you actually hitting the ground running, or, you know, is there a lot of learning and relearning to be done? So what can be done? So this is sort of about intergenerational governance. I love a blend of old and new in anything. You know, that's my conservative side, and then it's my more progressive side. You know, it's good to actually have a mixture of the two, you know, where institutional memory meets fresh ideas and innovation, and wisdom is passed on and not lost. So digital handovers and OC memory files, you know, past strategic plans, community goals, review notes, contacts, but also using AI increasingly to support OC memory, where it's becoming easier to look back over past records, including minutes, and just, you know, actually process that and find out, well, what have been the key decisions or the trends or the risks from past minutes and resolutions that have been identified? That's part of our corporate memory. But also an OC creating its own good practices guide, like, and that might be where they may need to create their own rules, you know, like, so that the institutional memory is not inside people's heads. Yeah. It's codified, it's made explicit. It's not just tacit knowledge. It actually is something that's embedded in documents. So we need to get better at doing that. And to make that realistic, that can be with rules, can be with a strategic plan, it can be with committee guidelines. This is how we do governance in this OC. So that even if an earlier generation of committee members are no longer available to assist, we are actually ensuring that we are working with the benefit of their insights and their lessons. But also knowing that, you know, we also want the energy, the enthusiasm, the new ideas, the innovations of new committee members. So it's getting that balance right, obviously. So, you know, for a small OC, that might be a 1 or 2 page, what we've learned summary. That's all that's needed. But for a larger OC, it might be a formal knowledge archive, you know, of your governance framework and how you do things and what makes for an efficient and effective OC. So the big idea here, Michael, good OCs make good decisions. Great OCs remember them. And that's the difference.
A good point to finish on, being the last practice in the guide. So we covered a lot, Nick, which was fantastic over the 2 sessions. And again, there's a online version to go into a bit more detail. I guess thinking through all of that, if you could wave your magic OC wand and give...
Which I often do, Michael.
And give owners corporations...
Don't feel your privilege in this regard. I often wave the wand.
Indeed. What's the one quality or capability you'd give an owners corporation, or I guess a committee, that would create the biggest shift for them out of what we learnt?
If I could, I'd give every owners corporation the capability to think and act strategically, to see the bigger picture, to align their wonderful community around shared goals, and that they're truly shared goals. They belong to all. And to make decisions that serve both the present and the future of their community, and to convert that into manageable bite-sized pieces, like, you know, simply having a committee meeting agenda that's organised around your goals. So, you know, you're thinking more strategically. you're being reactive, but you're increasingly being proactive in how we bring about community betterment and how we work with our community, work with lot owners and the manager to bring about great outcomes. So that shift alone would transform what's possible. That means sharing, of course, many of those tools and templates and plans so that we are more networked as OCs and as managers to learn from each other, because there's just so much expertise, so much richness, so much creativity that is just not being tapped into, like that's happening in the strata sector. So that leads to the second one, of course. I'd ensure that every OC over time becomes part of an OC network, that it's not a silo, it's learning from others, it's sharing insights into practice, and it's building collective capacity. That's what matters. We think about personal capacity, we think about the capacity of our manager or our committee, but the collective capacity is what's missing as to how we really build that capacity through the shared insights, the lessons, the knowledge sharing around key documents and so on. So two things: how we all of us become more strategic in the way we work, and we understand what that means in practice, and we learn from each other, and how we become far more networked so that there's actually an owners corporation movement in the best interest of all lot owners, of all managers, and of the strata sector as a whole.
Fantastic. Great. And that wraps up part 2 of our conversation with Nicholas Abbey. Thanks again for joining us, Nick. Appreciate the input and that contribution and the fantastic guide that we've been able to touch on and work through. It's full of gold nuggets for all of the owners who are keen to be part of the committee or already part of their committee. So just wrapping up today's discussion, really brought home the importance of how we show up as committee, not just in what we decide, but how we listen, how we communicate, and how we create a space where all voices are heard. We explored the theme of capacity, because without the right knowledge, skills and support and culture, even the best of intentions can fall short. And Nick's guide offers a clear and practical roadmap for owners corporations ready to lift their game and take their operation to a next level, not just for compliance, but for stronger communities, stronger governance, and better outcomes. To access the full version of the guide, it'll be available under our website under resources, just by clicking on Quantum Conversations. So thanks again for tuning in. And as always, we hope that the conversations that we have help lead you with purpose and building vibrant and connected residential communities where your residents are proud to call home.